Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown, and in today's episode, we're going to talk about ways to incentivize linkages between the domestic territory or domestic economy and special economic zones. So, before we go anywhere, let's take care of some basic definition. What's a special economic zone? You might heard the term free zone, free trade zone, enterprise zone. um, it's basically the same thing. It is basically a designated area where special rules apply, particularly around trade rules, customs rules, and they are designated or set up to attract investment, whether local or foreign. And these zones are used right across the world. There are thousands of them in many countries. It's not just a third world thing, or I think for developing countries, the first world countries also have zones or zone programs, maybe called by a different name, but they are there nevertheless. Now, in terms of a zone, typically as well, they get certain special incentives and the incentive package, and that's fiscal incentives. And there are three types of incentives, of course. There are fiscal incentives, which are tax breaks, basically, financial, where the government's actually paying um, investors, and then there are non-fiscal, which can come in a variety of forms, right? Now, zones typically can tap into, or zone programs can typically tap into all three of these in various extents. A lot of them, in fact, don't do financial incentives, but several of them do. So, for example, the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone program, it only has one fiscal incentives, which is basically the suspension of duties on items being imported into the zone until you make the next decision. If you sell it in the US, then of course US duties apply. If you export it out, when it gets to the next destination, that's when duties may or may not apply depending on the rules that apply in that country. And typically that'll be governed by some sort of trade agreement. So how do you encourage that linkage between the zone that's here and then the rest of the economy that surrounds it? And that's not a very important thing to happen. Zones of the past were basically set up in sort of an enclave model where the linkage that existed between the domestic and the zone was largely centered around labor, creating jobs and driving up jobs and all of that. But zones have evolved past that to be much more comprehensive economic drivers. So linkages become critical to that overall economic development goal. So linkages, there are a variety of ways you can encourage this. For example, in Costa Rica, they encourage linkages by encouraging domestic firms to sell to the zones, and if they reach a certain quota in terms of the number of exports that they make, that's or their sales, number of sales they make, as a percentage of their overall sales, I think it might be 50% if I'm not mistaken, then the the domestic firm is eligible for um the incentives, similar incentives that the zone gets. So there's a great incentive for them to, one, have the quantity of goods and services that are necessary to be able to interact with the zone. And that's service quality, goods quality, that's a critical part of facilitating linkages. If that does not exist, the linkages won't happen because the firms operate at a certain level and have to maintain that. So if they're sourcing goods and services from the domestic territory, the rest of the economy, those standards, they have to meet that standard and be at that level, or else it will not work. So there are different ways. You could also have tax credits, or you could have um, tax deductions. For example, in Jamaica, they have a or a zero they zero rate the value added tax, sales tax. So a company selling to to the zone from the domestic territory would um the well, firstly, the zone company would have to file with the tax authorities to be able to zero rate that sale coming from the domestic territory. So, at 15%, for example, you basically be making those goods and services 15% cheaper. So that's one way in terms of and it doesn't have to be zero. It could be another percentage. Could be you lower the value added tax to 10%, 5%, whatever it is that ordinarily is paid, right? In terms of tax deductions or tax credits, you could do, for example, once a um, certain level of sales are made by the domestic firm, they get to have a credit. They have to make a certain amount of sales to the zone, and then they can get a credit. Or the other way around, you could make it that the zone itself, depending on how you've structured your incentives package, that they could tap into a further tax credit or a further tax deduction if they buy a certain amount of value from the domestic space, and then they get to lower their tax rate further, assuming, of course, they're not paying zero or nothing in terms of corporate income tax. There's also the non-fiscal side of things, and these are very, very, while they may seem soft and on the the nice side of things, they're actually quite powerful in terms of what can be done in terms of even promoting companies. So, for example, a zone company that buys from the domestic space and makes it a routine, zone authorities, the government, the export promotion agencies can use them as examples and put them in promotional materials and so forth, and emphasize the fact that they do this. Corporate social responsibility is a major thing. It's also shaping consumer preferences and how they buy. So companies can actually use that as part of their marketing to say, we are here and we're being good corporate citizens in this country, and we are actually purchasing and adding value, not just labor, which is important and fantastic, but we're also engaged with local entrepreneurs, and we'd even help them to build up their standards to a certain level, not just to meet and sell to meet our demand and sell to us, but to sell further afield internationally or even to other zone players and so forth. So it becomes a virtuous circle that reinforces itself. Um, so there are many, many ways that zones or zone authorities, governments can encourage linkages, or even the companies within the space can encourage linkages. So if you like this episode, please like, share, subscribe. If you want to see me do a particular topic, just leave me a comment down below and I'll get right back to you. Bye for now.